And welcome to the Developing Resilient Libraries Workshop. My name is Sarah Holstead, and I'm the Hospital Library Services Program Manager at Southeastern New York Library Resources Council. Thank you for joining us today. You are all entering the meeting muted, and later in the presentation, we can take questions via chat, and we will enable your microphone so you can ask questions out loud and participate in the breakout sessions. At this time, I invite you to take a moment and say hello in the chat. So next slide, please, Michelle. So Developing Resilient Libraries is the first in a series of workshops that will take place over the next few months about planning for emergencies and disasters in your library and community before they happen. I'll drop the URL of today's workshop into the chat now. It has handouts that we'll use in the breakout session later in the presentation. This workshop series is funded in part, well, funded entirely with a grant from the National Library of Medicine. And I would like to acknowledge their support. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this material do not necessarily reflect the views of the National Library of Medicine or the National Institutes of Health. I'd also like to acknowledge the Southeastern staff who are here today helping behind the scenes. Carolyn Bennett-Glauda, Moshe Siegel, Tessa Killian, and Kelsey Milner. Thank you. Next slide, Michelle, please. We started planning for these workshops back in February in response to events we saw happening at libraries in the Southeastern region. This was not a response to the pandemic, but as we've seen over the past few months, natural disasters like hurricanes, a derecho, and wildfires haven't been put on hold for the pandemic. And I'm sure somewhere there's been a basement flood in a library. All humor aside, the way we experience emergencies or disasters is deeply personal, and the trauma can be life-altering. I just want to acknowledge the experiences that you all may be bringing to this workshop and ask that as speakers and listeners, we respect the narratives that may be shared today. In a moment, I'm going to turn the workshop over to our presenter, Michelle Stricker, Deputy State Librarian for the New Jersey State Library. She literally wrote the librarian's disaster planning and community resilience guidebook. But before we begin, I want to go over a few details. This presentation is being recorded, but the breakouts are not. What you type into the chat will not be recorded with the video. We trust that you will be courteous and respectful to other attendees and follow the Southeastern Code of Conduct. Anyone who uses the chat in an abusive or threatening way will be removed from this webinar. This presentation is being live captioned using otter.ai. You can see a link to it at the top of your screen. If you click on it, a new screen will open in your browser, which you can place to the side of your Zoom window to see the captions in real time. Sometimes the computer-generated captions can be a little off, so this is a reminder to all of us to speak slowly and clearly. If you have trouble getting the captions to work, private message Carolyn in the chat. The presentation slides will be available soon after the presentation at the workshop website. We will also have CE certificates available upon request. I will drop a link to the CE request form and the course evaluation into the chat at the end of the webinar. A final note about the meeting today. Our presenter, Michelle, will have her camera turned off, so you will only hear her for the presentation. She will turn her camera on for the Q&A at the end. Feel free to type your questions into the chat during the presentation. I will monitor that and will periodically feed your questions to Michelle. I will also be giving verbal directions to start and stop the recording. Finally, we're planning 2 breakout sessions during this workshop to kickstart your disaster planning process. To get to and from your breakout room, just click the Zoom prompt when it appears on your screen. I will frame the discussion going into the breakouts and lead a brief question time after we reconvene. I hope you'll dig into the breakouts and return for the whole session. Right now, I'll drop the workshop URL into the chat again so you can access the handouts. Again, thank you for being here today, and I'll turn the presentation over to Michelle.
Thank you, Sarah. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for having me. And thank you for your entire backup team for all the work that you all did in putting this all together. And hello, New York librarians. I want to tell you that fall is my favorite time of year, and you're just about in the most beautiful state for fall. So I hope you're all safe, and I hope you get a chance to go out and enjoy the beautiful fall foliage. I just absolutely love New York in the fall. So Sarah contacted me a while ago about doing this presentation, and I've done many, many versions of it over a number of years. But she said, I know we're all in the pandemic, but I really don't want to forget about traditional disaster preparedness and continuity of operations planning. And I was happy to do the presentation, but in order to do that, I felt that in the structure of it, I have to give you a little bit of the background of the work that I've done over the past many years now in disaster preparedness. So you can see how it evolved, and then later on we are going to get to the actual continuity of operations plan. But I want you to see how the concept has evolved from disaster preparedness to the role that the libraries play to the role in community resiliency. So with that, we're going to start out. And I'm going to just point out that all the photographs I think you're going to see in this are actually real photographs from New Jersey libraries from Hurricane Sandy, including this one you see on the screen, the very first one, which I think is particularly impactful. So when disaster strikes, where do you go? And after Hurricane Sandy hit New Jersey, like in late October 2012, people went to their local library. Many community libraries were pressed into service as ad hoc disaster recovery centers. And even though they may have sustained great damage to their own buildings or were without power themselves, librarians rallied and were in the forefront of providing services and information to those in need and a respite from the storm for shattered communities. And less damaged by flooding, New Jersey libraries were open and were the place residents flocked to the morning after Sandy passed, using computers and free wireless to begin putting their lives back together, to conduct business, to work from home, which in this case was the library was their home, to contact relatives or their insurance companies and fill out FEMA forms, or just to power up their devices and warm up. It was a really cold November that year, I remember. So libraries truly serve their communities as ports in a storm, even though many were not prepared to serve in this capacity as unofficial community disaster recovery centers. And that is the purpose of this presentation. Because of libraries' lack of preparedness, the New Jersey State Library organized a statewide summit we called Ports in the Storm in the spring of 2013. It was the first conference of its kind in the country designed to help libraries prepare to be even better partners in community disaster response and recovery when the next emergency strikes. We partnered with an NLM, just as you did today, on the conference. It was attended by 125 librarians, including representatives from New York, Delaware, and Virginia. And the goal of the summit was to bring medical and public librarians together with the emergency planning community, first responders, public health workers, and faith-based groups, and provide a forum for discussing the role libraries and information professionals play in supporting future disaster preparedness, response, and recovery efforts. This same scenario has been repeated many times now and in many states, whether it's a natural disaster like hurricanes and fire, mudslides in California and floods, man-made disasters that include chemical spills, train wrecks, or civil unrest, a shooting in the library, or the current opioid epidemic we're experiencing. And so I think that's the reason why you've tuned in today. So therefore, my goal for you is to promote the role of libraries as partners in disaster response and give you some tools so that you can start to think about what to do in your own facilities and community. And I'll share with you all the resources the New Jersey State Library has made available for your use. We're going to talk about disaster preparedness, but I'm going to mostly focus on the continuity of operations plan so that your library plays a role in community resiliency after a disaster. And I'm going to talk about how to form partnerships with your local emergency responders. So in reference to that first slide, according to the Red Cross, the #1 emergency call during Hurricane Sandy from people was from people who needed to plug in medical equipment in order to stay alive, like CPAP and ventilators and oxygen. And the number one thing that people need is accurate information on where they're going to go find these life-saving services. I want to first call your attention to the Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act. This is a federal law designed to bring federal natural disaster assistance for state and local governments in carrying out their responsibilities after a disaster to aid citizens. So Section 403 of the Stafford Act was changed a few years ago now so that libraries are now officially designated as essential services by FEMA and are therefore eligible for temporary relocation funding during major disasters and emergencies under the FEMA Public Assistance Program. So prior to this, FEMA's list included facilities for police, fire, emergency services, medical care, education, utilities, and other community essential services, but not libraries. Libraries are vital information hubs, and in the aftermath of a disaster, take on an even greater community role, providing free and easy access to technology and essential information. And we really do appreciate FEMA finally recognized our contributions and made this important change to the Stafford Act. Libraries should prepare and embrace their roles as community disaster recovery centers and telecommunication hubs before and after an emergency. This is a role libraries must assume in their community. And I just want to be clear about what I mean by a disaster recovery center. We know that libraries are not official disaster recovery centers that are pre-qualified ahead of time by FEMA. So the Lakewood Public Library you see there, that is officially pre-qualified ahead of time, while the little sign from Caldwell on the left, they were not an officially pre-qualified disaster recovery center. We realize that every library, cannot serve as an official disaster recovery center because they're very expensive for FEMA to set up and staff. And FEMA simply does not have the resources to set up and staff every library after an emergency. There are over 400 libraries in New Jersey alone. But libraries have served as unofficial disaster recovery centers through many a crisis. And librarians have worked right alongside FEMA and emergency responders, supporting their services and providing assistance, especially with technology and providing accurate information to the public. It's a natural role they assume in the community. Hurricane Sandy back in October 2012 was a reminder to New Jersey municipal, county, and state officials that libraries are valuable proven assets in disaster response and that they serve as a rallying point for the community in an emergency. Libraries serve multiple roles after a disaster, that is a safe haven, the unofficial disaster recovery center we talked about, information and technology hub, and as headquarters for volunteers and local emergency response. I know of one library where the local police just took over their entire community room and used that as their headquarters. So they're a natural gathering place for people after a disaster because of the multiple roles that they assume. Libraries are pretty much located in every community. Their locations are known. Their services are trusted by all, even by non-users. You can ask anyone in your town, where's the library? And even if they've never been in it, they know where it is. So the library as a safe haven. After a disaster, libraries offer respite from a storm, whatever that storm may be. They're a welcoming refuge for displaced citizens for many reasons, because mainly they have safe, secure buildings. During Hurricane Sandy, homes were mostly affected and businesses, but the library buildings were safe and secure. They have safe, relaxing, comfortable, and flexible spaces that they can move around. They have heat or air conditioning as needed. They have restroom facilities. They serve as a communication and information hub for the community with well-equipped tech labs that have internet, free Wi-Fi, email, fax, photocopiers, and let's not forget the old faithful landline. So as a natural gathering place for updates in the community, can you think of anywhere else in your community where neighbors would gather for this information? I mean, it just is, the library is the first thing that's going to come to mind. They have also served as temporary headquarters for FEMA, for other government agencies, for relief workers, and even the military. And they have served as food distribution centers. Relief agencies have used them for clothing and coat drives. And so a lot of volunteers have then come into your community rooms and been able to run services that were needed by the community from your location. And I always encourage you all that if a relief agency comes and asks for your help, that you always say yes. And all of these, are assets that you have. And, maybe you have a small library, so you don't have to do all of them. But all of these things help restore a sense of normalcy to the community. You can get back into a routine for adults and children amidst all this chaos. So the library helps people and small businesses get back on their feet and back to their lives more quickly. And that is really what community resiliency is all about. Now, I do recognize that libraries have always provided these services to their communities, but in an emergency, they are truly ports in a storm. Embracing this role is another way libraries continue to evolve to meet the needs of the community and are valued as an essential service by elected officials, emergency responders, and the public. So now let's talk about the skill set that librarians have that contributes to community resiliency. At our Ports in the Storm conference, the Red Cross representative told us that one of the number one needs after a disaster is accurate information. And that's exactly what librarians are trained to provide. Our skill set is such that we're great with technology, right? Pretty good. We deliver accurate information in a variety of formats and settings, and we're pretty good at strategizing and problem solving quickly. Furthermore, the public sees librarians as more approachable than government agency staff. And according to a 2018 Knight Foundation poll and also a 2018 Gallup poll, the public trusts librarians more than the news media. And that was a 78% to 33%. And librarians were viewed as knowledgeable and trusted, helpful, customer service oriented, and non-judgmental. So of course, when people are checking out materials, we don't judge what they are taking. And the same in the aftermath of a disaster. There's going to be a lot of personal, private business that they may need to conduct and may need help from a librarian. And they trust us to be confidential and to be non-judgmental. And even our paraprofessional and support staff are dedicated in this way. And they know their customers well because, many of them live in the community themselves. So our staffs are often the best resources that we offer to the community and to elected officials and emergency management. I want to stress that librarians serve in the capacity of second responders who support first responders. We are not asking librarians to rush in alongside of emergency personnel to put out that fire or that flood. But we can say that we are information first responders. And yes, I did have those pins made in the upper right-hand corner. And if we were doing this in person, I would give them out to all of you. The objective of the second responder is to quickly enable people to get back to work, get back to their lives, and ensure recovery of a community's economic life. Identifying and empowering second responders, us, helps make a difference between lasting disruption from a disaster or crisis and a quick return to daily life. And libraries play a critical role in making this happen. Furthermore, libraries continue to play a role long after the disaster is quote, over, which is why it's so critical to have a continuity of operations plan, which I'm just going to call a COOP plan from now on. I know it's like a double P in there, a COOP plan, but it's going to be a COOP plan from now on. The library's role in helping the community recover from a disaster extends out much longer than any other organizations. So think about it. What's going to happen is emergency management is going to withdraw once that emergency is over, the fire is put out, say. Government agencies like FEMA are going to pack up afterwards once all the forms, they've helped fill out all the forms and the aid is all distributed, and they're going to leave. But libraries have staying power in their community. And I can honestly say that in New Jersey, we are still assisting people today that were affected by Sandy back in 2012, because don't forget, this came off the coastline and wiped out housing, and it's been a very, very long time in getting those people back on their feet, their houses rebuilt, and it's still not over today. And as well as, adapting our virtual information services during what's going on right now in the pandemic. So how do we start to prepare our libraries to become resilient libraries? And here's a checklist for you. We need to start with first things first. Of course, the whole point of resiliency is to promote cooperation and coordination among emergency management, and the community partners, the public and the library. And this is what they call now a whole community-based approach to disaster response for libraries that focuses on service continuity. We didn't learn about this in library school. In fact, it's only been recently that I started to see a number of academic librarians that are actually picking up on this and writing papers about the topic on the role that libraries play after disaster. But if you've been a public librarian, you've had your boots on the ground years and years before this. And you know that we've been doing this for a long time already. Our first responders have always been involved with disaster preparedness. That's their job, but it's only been over the last few years that libraries have begun to assess their post-disaster resources and services and plan how to work more closely with the community. So it's all about really the resources that we have to offer. So let me get back to my short list of how I advise libraries to prepare for an emergency ahead of time so that you can assume the role of a community disaster recovery center. Number one, prepare your library facility and staff. And what this means is you have to have your disaster plan or your COOP plan, your emergency technology plan, and a temporary facilities plan. You got to know that you're going to have to bring in power supplies, a portable generator possibly, and power strips, and you can purchase all of those supplies ahead of time. Don't purchase laptops or computer equipment, extra equipment in advance. Not that all of you have money for that, because you may not have an emergency for 5 years. And what happens to a computer after 5 years? It's like obsolete. So what we recommend is that you have sort of like maybe a slush fund, disaster slush fund of a few $1,000s, that if it comes down to it, you can just take that funding out and purchase some extra computer equipment like laptops when the time comes, rather than unpack a 10-year-old computer that you've been saving, for when you need it. So what's new is the focus on service continuity instead of the traditional disaster plan. That's internal. That's on your building. The COOP plan that we're going to talk about today originally came from the enterprise world. And we've adapted it and adopted it for libraries and archives. So number two, make plans to keep your library website, online resources, and social media accessible and updated. Now, what you have to do is move things to the cloud, of course, but you're going to also have to let the public be aware and that you have these services. So you're going to have to promote these online services ahead of time, that in the event of a disaster, we want to let you know that this is going to be available. and you have to keep doing that so that they know if a disaster hits that the library has resources that can help them. Number 3, inform elected officials of your capabilities. You have to tell your elected officials of the services that you intend to offer after a disaster, because trust me, they don't know all of your capabilities and everything that you have to offer unless you already have a very close relationship with your elected officials and they're very involved with your library. It's also important that you keep in contact with them during the disaster so that you can get updates and you can give them updates about what you are doing. Number 4, develop a relationship with community emergency responders. You need to learn the incident command system. I'll talk about that later. And because that is really the management structure of emergency response, we need to understand the special language that emergency responders use when they go into this crisis communication, because there's a structure involved that they default to that every emergency responder in the country would understand if they had to work together. They are not using different terms to mean different things. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. And it's up to us really to learn what they're saying and also to follow their orders. Number 5 is to work with other community partners outside of emergency management. You want to join forces with others in your community whose mission includes disaster response, like the faith-based and nonprofit groups. You want to partner with other libraries if you can, outside or surrounding your region for support services, and maybe to share a cache of disaster supplies like you see in the picture. And I'm right there in the front holding the crate. That's me. We were giving out grants to for different libraries to purchase disaster supplies. And then number 6, we encourage libraries to take part in National Preparedness Month, which is September actually. It's sponsored by FEMA. And you can offer programming throughout September, also throughout the year, that will help the public assemble some, things like a family emergency supply kit, or help them craft a personal family emergency plan. So therefore, you're helping your community by running these programs. You're helping them, individuals and families, get ready for emergencies. And then you need to promote the role of the library as a disaster recovery center. An educated community is a safer community, and a community that is resilient and is going to bounce back faster. So with this, I want to just, in the next slide, give a quick shout out to say that something that we learned very quickly when COVID hit was that all this traditional disaster preparedness planning we had been doing meant nothing, because all of our disaster plans did not apply in a pandemic. We were completely, I would say, I don't want to say shocked, but we were completely surprised that nothing that we wrote in our traditional disaster plans applied in the pandemic. Now, I know New York, as well as New Jersey and everyone else, has done a lot of work on this, so I'm not going to go over it. Just that these are a couple of resources where you can find your reopening plans and your PPE and things like that, and how to disinfect library materials, and they're all on these websites. Everyone did just an amazing job. I think every state, every library is in putting these resources together in like lightning time, and they're really a good. Really a good and thorough job for COVID-19 in how we need to deal with this. So that's just a reminder that the traditional disaster plan does not apply to a pandemic. We're going to move on to the COOP plan now. And I know this is a little small on your screen, but basically this is your disaster plan or your continuity of operations plan. And is almost interchangeable for what we're using it for today. This is meant to be folded up into the size of a credit card. It has a front and a back, and that's it. And you can fill it out in an afternoon. And of course, what we say is, not everybody's going to be involved in doing this. You're going to have, a small disaster response team in your library. But this is it. This is a disaster plan made easy. It was originally done by the Council of State Archivists. It was called the PrEP plan. And then the libraries took it and used it as, used it as a disaster plan, and now using it as a COOP plan. And you'll see that it is color-coded by teams, and it's going to be in a Word doc for you, so that when you go back, take this back to your own library, you're going to be able to just, edit the document, put in the names of the people who are going to be on the red team, the blue team, the green team, and fill everything in. And you can see the headings are fairly clear. There's, who's responsible for activating the disaster team, who's assuming preparedness responsibilities. You can't see the entire, I think you don't see the entire page here, but again, you have the link to that. You're going to name who's going to be the director of your red team, the director of your emergency response coordinator, who's the associate director in case the director is not available, who's going to be backup for the emergency response coordinator. Blue team is mostly IT, you can see, data services and director, and then they've put historical collections, special collections, who's a contact for those collections there. And also, you go up to the brown team, that's your, that's going to be who's going to be responsible for changing your voice messages and answering the phones if you can, and switching them over. The VOCCI, that, that also, that it really only corresponds to sort of academic libraries, because this plan has been used not only for public, but primarily I think it was used first for the academic libraries. So you'll see that there's some language in there that's going to be specific to them. And then, you have the green team. You'll see there's things you're going to have to purchase. I had mentioned maybe computer equipment, extra extension cords and power ports. I think a great thing to have you get from Home Depot is like a $500 gas powered generator, which you would run outside. And what that allows the public to do is to charge up their personal devices, their cell phones and their laptops, their iPads, things like that. And I think you could even approach Home Depot and describe what you want to do, and I'll bet you they would give you one for just some acknowledgement on that. They're fairly inexpensive, but they can really be a lifesaver, especially if your power's out in the library, which did happen in New Jersey. A lot of libraries, their power was out. They still, they still let people in because they needed to warm up at that when Sandy hit. So that's sort of the front page of the disaster response plan and the COOP plan. And you'll see it's kind of just plugging in all of the people in your organization who are going to be involved. And now if you go to the back of the plan, there's kind of even less work involved here. The left-hand column just sort of gives you, that asks you to plug in your medical and your fire, your emergency response contacts. It tells you sort of what to do immediately if the tornado hits or if there's a bomb threat. So it does list some of the emergencies that could happen. You'll see down the bottom just coming off, what if you have an active shooter? What if there's, a hazmat incident is off the screen? Again, there's resource contacts that are all filled in for you. Lyricist is great for consulting services. Belfour, if you need to call in. Trucks that, if your books are wet, your materials are wet, and you need the freezer trucks to come in right away. And you'll put in, your numbers for the facilities management, and you can see them written up on the screen. And then also finally some in the blue, some resources that all libraries use pretty much are, our EBSCO and links to our newspapers and, whatever we have or whatever it is that you have that you need their phone numbers for, you're going to put in there. You've got a special collection, special section on historical collections. And what's very important here is that this be organized by priority collections. Now, most public libraries, you all have historical collections, whether you know it or not. You have information that is unique to your community, that only your community has, and that's what makes it historical or important. And what I did when I was the director of my small little library is that you bring in your fire chief and you say, if the library is on fire, if something happens here, I want to show you, this is the most important collection in the library. Please save this first. Another thing people have done is, of anything that was of greatest value, they would just take like blue tape, reflective tape, and just, put it on the shelf, strip it, along the edge of the shelf line. And then you tell the emergency responders, because you're not going to go in there when, they're putting out the fire or whatever. You're not allowed in. You're going to say, please find the shelving or the room with the blue reflective tape, and please save those items first. So that's up to you to organize for your historical collections. And then finally, there's relocation strategies. If you simply cannot open your library, what are you going to do? Where are you going to go? And that's also where the Stafford Act helps out, because you can get funding for relocation strategies. So, that's it in a pocket, in a nutshell. You could do it in an afternoon, and then you separate your teams by color, you fill everything in, you fold it up, and you make sure everyone has one. Don't put it in your desk drawer, have it at home with you. And we discovered that after having disaster plans that went from being 100 pages long to, 50 and then 25, that when you just really, we've distilled it down to, this is the information you need, and it fits front and back and in your pocket. And so I hope that you find that very helpful. I hope if you're a small library, you say, you know what, I can do that, because I know if I had to open up a disaster plan and I saw it was 100 pages long, I would just say, you know what, I can't do this. I don't have time. I have a small staff. We can't be, we'll do it another time, but this, I think, is, and it's been used now by libraries in many other states, and it seems it's always a work in progress in making the COOP plan better. I would suggest attaching a floor layout, as a drawing of the plan of your library, to it. And I think that this is really going to be all you need, and I think it's going to be great for you to use. And after you do go back to your libraries, if you do work on this and you want to provide me with any feedback about how you made out, then I would welcome you to email me whenever you want and tell me your thoughts, whether you thought it went well, worked great, if you saw any problems. I can then take that with the people who do sort of rearrange this plan and bring back your comments to them. So that's the COOP plan. At this time, there's going to be a breakout, and it is our risk assessment exercise. And I'm going to turn the program over to Sarah now, and she's going to run the exercise and put you all into breakout rooms so that you can discuss the risk assessment among yourselves. Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Michelle. And yeah, thank you for your presentation so far, and for running through the COOP plan in detail. And had we been meeting face to face, that might have been one of the activities that we really dug into. But I wanted to use our breakout session this time to do something that addresses the first point on your list about becoming a resilient library, and that's preparing librarian staff. So what we're going to do with this session, we're going to go through the steps of listing hazards that might affect your library operations so that you can then assign a risk score to the hazard and then start deciding what your priorities are and when and how to address those hazards. Because, you know, while Michelle has been preparing you to think about becoming a port in a storm, I think it's also important to recognize that libraries and, you know, library staff are also experiencing, you know, disasters as well. And so, you know, you can become resilient by preparing. And so I like this exercise because it helps to put a boundary around the kind of amorphous and producing events, and it helps to find a way to move forward with your planning. So basically you break the challenges into smaller and manageable chunks. So I popped into the chat one more time the URL for the workshop website where you can get the handouts. And so if you have the handout, what you see on the PowerPoint screen is the first is page 1 from the risk assessment planning worksheet. And we'll also be referring to page 4 from that worksheet. So what I'll do is talk you through some of the examples that we did for Southeastern earlier this week. And then we'll move into the breakout rooms and work through 2 scenarios. And the goal is for you to understand the process so you can repeat this in your library. But be warned, it's really easy to get sidetracked into talking about the time that the basement flooded on the weekend and you were the one who found it and how it got fixed. So just please don't dominate your breakout session. There will be time to share at the end of this webinar during the informal Q&A. So let me make this slide a little bigger. And so what you see at the top of your slide is the risk assessment table. And it has a couple of columns. And then underneath that, because I can't help myself, it's thoroughly documented the information that you would put into those columns. So column number 1, you want to talk about and you know, place a boundary around the area or the context that you're talking about. And so usually it's statewide, municipal, or multi-jurisdictional, which usually means county-wide in New York, or you want to be talking about your library. The second column is where your imagination explodes. And this is where you start listing a hazard or a threat. But another thing that I wanted to share is that New York State has done an amazing amount of planning on identifying hazards. And so we can use the list that they provided, which is on page 4 of your handout. So there's already a state list of hazards. Column number 3 is where you estimate the likelihood or the probability of a hazard or a threat occurring in your library in the next year. And so it goes from not likely to very likely. Column number 4 is where you estimate the damage. And so this is, you don't have to put a price on it just yet, but just kind of think about the effort that would be involved in the cleanup and the effort that would, the amount of money that would be involved. And so then you multiply the likelihood times the damage estimate to get your risk score. So for Southeastern, our exercise was at the state level, we figured that in the next year, it's highly likely that we will experience a severe storm. And so we gave the likelihood of 5. We figured that the damage could be moderate. So we gave that a score of 3, multiply that and you get 15. And so Michelle, if you can go to the next slide, we'll kind of graphically map that. There you go, lots of colors. And so in the box with the green and yellow and orange and red, you'll see that there are actually 2 15s. Since our probability was high, we start at the top of the box. Since the impact is medium, we start in the middle of the box. And so we can see that our risk score is 15, which we then follow the blue dotted arrow over. And so high probability, low impact. And so our risk control strategy is mitigation. And so this is, taking preventative action. So for example, in a severe storm, we might want to purchase a generator. So that's it kind of in a nutshell. Does anybody have any questions before we send you all away to the breakouts? I don't see anything. Okay, so we're going to have 10 minutes in our breakout rooms, and someone from Southeastern is going to be there to facilitate the discussion. So Carolyn, you can stop recording and you can send us all to the breakout. High probability or high impact, where you do risk avoidance, and this is where you cite things differently. You use a combination of the strategies above, and so I know these are kind of buckets, but it's a way to contain the problem and then start brainstorming within that, or talking to your insurance adjuster, or start talking to vendors, and use this to feed into that COOP plan, so that you know like what, when X happens, this is the team that gets mobilized. Does that help answer your question? Okay, thank you.
I think so. It was for my group, but I think so. I mean,
That's a really, go ahead. That's a really good question. And I kind of risk planning and risk assessment, insurance adjusters spend their whole careers working on this. And so to try and get all this in one event is probably asking a lot. And with that in mind, I'd really like to carry on with our presentation. I know we only have about 30 minutes left, so I think Michelle is going to have to pick and choose the slides that she wants to cover, just so that we have some time for Q&A at the end. So what I'm going to do, Carolyn, if you're ready, I will ask you to resume the recording. And we will carry on, and I will turn the presentation back to Michelle.
Okay, we are recording.
Right. And Michelle still has her mute on.
There you go. How's that?
That's great. Thank you.
Great. Great. Okay, so before I spent my time trying to tell you about all the things that libraries have to offer the community by way of services after a disaster, by helping the community get back on its feet, and people you can partner with. And I'm going to dive into that a little more deeply now, and I'm going to go into my Jersey speed talk, since you told me we're running a little short on time. Now, working with emergency management, we've talked about all the resources that libraries bring to emergency management after a disaster, although emergency management may not always be aware of the important role that libraries play in community resiliency. And you're going to have to approach them yourselves and tell them about what you have to offer, because they're way too busy and short-staffed to come to you. And quite frankly, they probably never even thought of libraries as playing a part in the emergency response role. So I'm going to give you some tips for addressing them. Ask if you can join their conversations about risk assessment, mitigation, and preparedness planning in their area of coverage, your area of coverage. You want to seat at that table. Ask if you can be incorporated into your county, state, and local preparedness exercise scenarios and action plans, because they do practice for different scenarios. It's very important that they keep up to date on that. And so you need to be a part of that too. Start by establishing a primary point of contact at the local emergency management office. Often this is the fire chief. Request that you can attend and have a seat at their planning meetings, briefings, and updates, and then realize that this partnership must be sustained. The training, outreach, and communication is an ongoing process. You need to make emergency management realize the importance of getting the library back open quickly after a disaster. because remember, FEMA now considers us an essential service. Emergency management can help you by restoring your power quickly, clearing debris from the property, and even doing some minor repairs around the library facility. And it's important that you remain high on their priority list so that you can reopen to provide services to the community. And you need to work on this plan together. Funding's not needed, or it's very minimal, maybe a little bit of travel, but probably not, and is not to be an obstacle in the way of your partnership efforts. If it's a regional or statewide partnership effort, then what all is going to be required is staff time to attend those types of meetings. I mentioned earlier, let's see if I mentioned earlier the incident command system. Wait, I think let me go back. I'm mouse happy here. Here we go. The incident command system. And I mentioned that this is the default language of emergency response. And there is the link to the FEMA training guide for this. This is free for you to take this course. And they have two different levels. One is if you just are sort of a manager that wants to be familiar with the terms, and you can see on the chart to the right what sort of the hierarchy of the organization and of the terminology.
Michelle,
and the second one is
Michelle, can I interrupt you for a second? We're just not seeing your slides.
you're not.
No. Oh, do you want to? Did you go in? Can you go in and share your screen again? You're not sharing your screen at the moment.
Just tell me how.
Sure. Just go open your Zoom and go to the bottom of your screen and you should see.
God, I think I see it. It still says, I think that I'm in, I know I don't want to leave that. I'm sorry, let me open my Zoom again. Hang on a sec.
Yeah, just when you're back into your Zoom window, click on share screen. It should be green at the bottom of your window.
We good?
There you go. Yeah.
Okay. Did you see this one? This is when I was talking about working with your emergency responders. That was the slide before. You can see that libraries held, story hours outside in the sand. You can see the damage from Sandy. You can see the clothing drives the libraries held. The different libraries held after Sandy. So that was that slide. And you can see this incident command slide system now, correct? Oh, okay. So this is on the FEMA website. As I said, there's two different levels of the class. One is just for you to be familiar with the hierarchy and the terminology. And that's good for everyone to take. And then there's a more in-depth one where you'll receive a certification. And but that requires several hours worth of training. I hope I've made it clear that it is your responsibility to contact emergency management. So it is all on you to nurture these relationships. And this is the default system language that they go to when a disaster strikes. And the beauty of the system really is that it is scalable. It's applicable to a small or a large area incident, and that is the word for disaster, by the way. They don't use the word disaster. They use the word incident, probably has a more calming effect. And all emergency responders understand this language. So that's why I highly recommend that you become familiar with it. There'll be one incident commander, just one, even if multiple emergency management from different towns come together. Safety officer, a public information officer. You don't want more than one person speaking to the press. You want a unified voice in that, and you want to pick who that person is. And you could see it just breaks out and breaks out and breaks out from there. So take a look at the FEMA site, become familiar with the terminology, because when you work with emergency responders, that's what they're going to be talking about. And you'll know what they're saying, and you'll also be able to follow their orders. better if you understand this particular structure. Now, we were going to have another breakout, and we don't have time for that, but I do want to point out that this disaster planning and community resiliency learner guide is really an excellent, excellent discussion guide that you can have at your library, because it's going to ask for examples where you may have served your community already in this capacity. Are there other scenarios where you could help out? It's also going to say who are going to be some of the volunteer organizations in the community I need to partner with. So it's going to help you identify and list your potential community partners and how you're going to support community resiliency in times of crisis. So I'm just going to point you out that that particular learner guide, which we're unfortunately going to skip at this time, but maybe in another session we can come back to it. The Red Cross is really desperate for volunteers after a disaster, but in order to volunteer, you have to be trained or they can't use you. And this is why that we recommend that your library disaster response team, the people that are involved in your own library, receive CERT training. You want to contact your local emergency management office to see when they offer it. They probably offer it every year, CERT team training. This is going to help you just not only be able to help people in your library, but it's like very light search and rescue sort of work, or very light medical kind of work, nothing very, very serious. But if you want to volunteer out in your community, you won't be able to help them unless you are CERT trained. And also, you want to make sure that you get in touch with your CERT team in your local community so that they can help you once an emergency strikes. They can come into your library and also help with whatever may be needed. Once you've made those and established contacts, you want to search out those faith-based groups and nonprofits that are active after a disaster. You want to offer space in your library for their food and their clothing drives. And this is how you kind of build this whole community support team in times of great need. It's that whole community approach I talked about very early on, or mentioned very early on in the presentation. My next project is going to be to work on an asset-based community development. It's called a place-based framework, and that builds on the skills, experiences, the knowledge and the passion of your local residents. And once you know who these people are and who the local associations are, you can use them to build a more sustainable community, one that is more resilient, that relies on itself rather than looking for outside help to come in with a disaster. And that's like a really important point to make. Often people look and say, who's going to come in from the outside to help me? No one is. Or by the time they get there, it's too late. It's a day, it's days later. You have to look to yourselves, to your own community, and to your own people to help first. They are closest to you. And that is why it is imperative that you establish these relationships with Citizen Corps and the CERT teams. These are the people like Citizen Corps. They're going to come in, like if your library's flooded and the mud's all over, they're going to actually, like you see in the picture, are going to be the people that are going to help you clear out the mud from all the flooding or the water damage. So you have to look to help yourself first, because nobody is going to get there fast enough to help your community. I also want to take a few minutes to talk about one of our great strengths, and that is social media and technology. Social media has proven to be very adept at covering disasters. And when Sandy hit New York and New Jersey, people went to Facebook, Twitter, YouTube to post and share images of the storm. People use social media to connect, to share, and to collaborate on their disaster recovery efforts. Local folks use social media to keep up with news reports, and they even made use of like mapping sites to keep track of like what gas stations were open and where could you get food, and where were supply distribution centers, where was there downed wiring, things like that. And then of course thousands of photos of storm damages were posted to Flickr. So social media is now considered so vital that it is integrated into all emergency preparedness and communications effort, because the public is expecting it and the public is using it. And they are not going to wait to be told what to do, but are actively posting what they know and seeking what they don't know. Websites, email, and even paper will continue to be important resources for the public, but in a time of crisis and the resulting communication noise, librarians need to push out urgent messages directly into the social media world and then direct the public back to your online resources, which are kind of like the static resources. This is the technology, social media, that's particularly well suited to librarians and information professionals. We're usually adept at, vetting news sources and technology. And this is truly where we can claim this mantle of being information first responders, if you will. I know of libraries where the mayor has asked the librarians to tweet out information for them. So that's a role that you can approach your elected officials about, assuming it integrates you more into becoming an essential service in your community. And I always think about that. Essential services can't be cut. Essential services must be funded. And so, I always think of the library and always making the case and doing everything you can so that, that is the way the elected officials view you. We had librarians during Sandy who packed up their laptops and they walked across the dunes at the Jersey Shore to the tents that FEMA pitched, and they sat right down next to FEMA and they started inputting FEMA, helping people who had to walk there because they couldn't drive there. They had to walk there. The roads were flooded, and they were inputting information right on the scene. And that's when FEMA turned to New Jersey libraries and said, you know what, you guys really get it. And that's the kind of response that I want you to have with your elected officials. So I maybe talked too fast, but I've talked about a lot today, and I want to review some of the things that we talked about and the steps you can take to help your library and community after a disaster. Put together a committee that's going to write that plan and focus on your facilities first, because you can't help people unless you can open up. Use that COOP plan template. You could for both. It's sort of interchangeable with a traditional disaster plan. It'll be done in an afternoon. And if you want to advance from there, FEMA has a number of disaster tabletop scenarios on their website. And it is recommended that you pick a scenario and you run it through with your staff at least once a year. So you can find those listed on the FEMA website. Plan for the reopening of your facilities as quickly as possible so that you can help your community. Now, as I mentioned, of course, if your building is severely damaged, like those were in Texas during Hurricane Harvey, this may be impossible. And just like you have to help yourself first. You have to help your library first, because unless you can open back safely, you can't help the public. So take care of your facilities first. And then investigate how you would resume some of your critical operations, either in another location or virtually. And by this time, we should be pretty prepared, I think, due to COVID-19 for switching to virtual services pretty much on the turn of a dime. Establish all of your community connections before a disaster strikes, and maintain those connections so that the emergency responders, the elected officials, the faith-based groups. Don't forget about you. With emergency management, like I said, make sure to tell them the sort of resources you bring to the table and how you're going to help them. And that's the approach you need to take. Not emergency management, how you're going to help me. Emergency management, this is how we can help you after a disaster. And that's what they're looking for. How you're going to help them, because there's not enough of them, frankly, when something bad hits the area. I've presented at conferences, emergency management conferences, and when I talk to them about the services that the libraries provide, it's actually kind of funny because I've actually seen them bang their heads on the table, smack themselves in the head and say, why didn't we think of that before? And, that's sort of like the most fun part of the presentation, when here we are, we've been here all along, we've been doing this, we've been offering these kind of services all along, and now they finally get it. And when they finally get it, you're going to find they'll start coming to you. And that's really going to be a great situation, when they remember you and how that you're going to be helping them when an emergency strikes. Now you're going to make contact with your local community volunteers, those CERT teams I just went through very quickly, and the Citizen Corps is another federal training program. You're going to look for local faith-based and nonprofit groups. They're all in your communities, churches and synagogues, all are running, different kinds of programs. United Methodist Church, they are known worldwide for providing disaster relief. It is a huge part of their mission. So you can look them up, and also you can look up their website. They have a lot of great resources. And don't forget that I mentioned to get CERT trained yourself, because not only will you be able to help your community, you'll help yourself and your own family too, when you learn what needs to be done. After you've done all this preparation, you can then let your community know to check your Facebook page and your Twitter account after an emergency. You're going to be keeping those up to date with alerts from your local officials and emergency management. You're going to put together a social media team for this, so that, we called it the pajama brigade, because the social media team could do this literally at home in their pajamas. And remember to direct people back to your website and your online resources. And there actually is, there's a hashtag, social media for emergency response. So there's also a group where you can and take some training if you want on how to run sort of like a social media response program for your community and your town. So there's more information available out there for you if you want to seek it out. Remember, you need to direct people back to your online resources, as I mentioned before. And finally, know that the day after a disaster, the public's going to be at your door. There's going to be a line around the block, as there were at many New Jersey libraries after Sandy. So be as ready and prepared for them as you can. Think about ways that you can make your spaces flexible to accommodate crowds. Think about how your children's librarians can maybe take care of the kids by doing story times and keeping them entertained, while stressed out parents are going to be able to go and work, plug in their laptops and work from your library, or fill out the forms that are needed. And, plus this also, kids are scared, during this time. If there's something happens to their house, they see something's happened to their community. Having your youth services librarians running these sorts of programs that they're used to really helps out children, calms them down, gives them a sense of normalcy, and lets them relax a little bit, which helps out their parents relax. So think about the services that you're going to provide for the youth of their community, and also know that people are going to be concerned about their pets too. So there's even FEMA even offers a pet preparedness course, which is very popular if you ever want to run it in your own library. it always gets a lot of attendance because people love their pets and they are not going to leave them. So that's another thing that you might want to address. And then one further word of advice on this is that your own staff may be personally affected by a disaster. So they need permission to take care of themselves and their families first. If you're the director, if you're the trustee, they need permission. I'm not talking formal permission. They need to know that you're going to tell them it's okay. You go home and deal with what you have to deal with because you live in this community and you need to get your own affairs in order. And we're not quite as effective as you are, so we'll hold down the fort here at the library for you. Take care of your staff first. Let them do what they need to do. And then also you need to realize that there's people that do well in an emergency situation and other people that do not. So consider your staff's own mental health when taking into consideration who's going to be on your team. Here's a link to that library.
So Michelle, I need to stop you right there.
Okay.
We're running towards the end of our time. But I think what you just talked about was a really good segue to talk about the next workshop in this series, which is self-care, self-defense, and de-escalation, which is on October 20th. I wonder, as I'm wrapping up, could you scroll to the last 2 slides? I just want people to know that we've put together a series of resources for libraries. If you go to the slide before that, you'd mentioned a course that people can take for librarians to become disaster information specialists. And so this grant that we have is supporting people to get that certification. You can contact me if you have questions. And then if you go to the slide after this, you can see that we've prepared a list of links that you can share with your communities. These are checklists and they're variations on the checklists from different government organizations. But really the whole point is to make a plan, work through the list, and help your community be resilient. And you will see that the last link there is about pet safety in emergencies. So I know that we really are hitting the end of our time. So again, I'll just remind you that the links to the end of workshop survey are in the chat. And you can also request a CE credit in the chat. Again, our next webinar on October 20th is self-care, self-defense, and de-escalation. And so I'd like to thank you all for attending today. And thank you, Michelle, for sharing your knowledge and expertise. Michelle is going to stick around for 10 or 15 minutes for just an informal Q&A. And again, thank you for your time. Carolyn, you can stop recording now.
Thank you for having me, and feel free to email me with any questions. I was really at the end of the presentation anyway, and just wanted to point out that you could go to the toolkit. It's free to use for everyone.
Absolutely. And we've put a link to the toolkit on the workshop website, and I'll make sure to include a link to your email as well in case people want to get in touch with you.
So my only question now